Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, the chair of the UHSAA Executive Committee, Craig Hammer, the Assistant Superintendent of the Washington School District. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thanks, Mark. I got to correct one thing. I'm an executive director. If I was assistant soup, I'd get a big raise.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
But it's okay.
Let's have you start by sharing with us where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, your background, involvement in youth sports, all that type of stuff.
Well, Hutch, and I'll try to make a long story short, but as you know, I was born in Salt Lake, raised in Salt Lake. I grew up in the shadows of Brighton High School, and Dad crushed me when I was in junior high, and we moved to Murray. So I ended up going to Murray High, which was a great deal. I ended up going to Murray High. I played hoop, ran track, played baseball, played golf, had quite a great time at the old alma mater, Murray High. I went to St. George. My connection with St. George. I came to St. George on a basketball scholarship, played 2 years down here, and then I finished my playing days up at the University of Utah. But when I came to St. George, the reason why it was the best move I ever made is I met my dear wife down here. She's from St. George, and we ended up getting married the summer before my senior year of playing. And then we both had jobs. We were both teaching. I graduated from the University of Utah, took a job, my very first job. I took a job at a junior high in Davis District for 1 year and found out that junior high wasn't quite my cup of tea because I really wanted to coach. And so that second year I got hired back at my alma mater. And that was an interesting experience going back, I'd only been gone 5 years, 5 years, and I was back at my alma mater. And
so let's put some years on this for our listeners.
So this was 1980. Let's see, I played at the U 80 through 82, got married in 81, taught in that school in Davis District in 83, and went to Murray in 84. Roughly, that's about where it was.
That sounds about right, because I was at Jordan. I had just become the AD, and I remember you were the hoop coach over at Murray. So continue.
Yeah. Well, anyway, and I remember meeting you, and you were coaching girls basketball at Jordan.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was, and I was coaching at Murray and Hal Hale and the old Jordan High School, and one of my favorite all-time gyms I've ever played in my life, by the way. That was a relic and a great school.
It's got a great
floor. It was a good
too.
school, but that was, there was no place to take the ball out of bounds, but it was just wonderful. And then in 1990, I got a phone call saying there was a job open in St. George. And at that time we had 2 kids, and we really thought it would be a great place to raise our kids and stuff. And I loved working at my high school. I had no reason to leave. In fact, if I remember that well, this is 1990, a lot of tears were shed. I was the head coach, and we moved to St. George, and I only coached for 2 years. They asked me to be an assistant principal. I did that for 2 years. And then they promoted me to the principal in 1994 at the ripe old age of 34. And I remember waking up that next morning wondering what I got myself into. And so 13 years later, they moved me from Dixie High into the district office in the position I'm in right now. And I was my first year on the executive committee, I think was 99, 2000. I was the region chair. And then I think 2009, I think was Rob's first year. It was our executive director, Rob Cuff. Then I was asked to be chair of the committee. And I don't know, every 2 years, I seem to get reelected. I get up and leave the room, and they've been real kind. And it's been a great experience. It's been a great great, like I said, experience, but very rewarding to be part of such a great organization and have the ability to do all we can to help and support kids.
Yeah. So I
That's
look
me.
back at that time on the executive committee. I think you've been on it longer than I have, but I think I've been the AD rep since, I don't know, 2002 or 3. I know I've been on there twice when we've had the Section 8 meeting. I remember you back when we had the Band of Brothers hearing. No one will know what that is, but you were not the
Yeah, I
chair
was
then, and
part
I
of
was
that
just
one too.
yeah, that was interesting. So thanks
Well,
for
here's how
sharing that.
you know you're old, Mark, if you can remember having a meeting in that old building, the old
Yeah,
Octagon UHSAA building
the Octagon.
with the
That's
roof leak. I remember going to my
yeah.
first executive committee meeting in that building, but those are years ago.
And the roof did leak. Exactly. Let's
Yeah.
have you talk about some of the mentors in your life, some of the people that made a big difference, either playing, coaching, or in your administrative role, or all of them.
Well, probably the number one mentor in my whole life, and I owe him more than I could ever repay. And I tell people this when they ask. I'm sitting behind this desk and had the career that I had because I had a high school basketball coach that saw something in me that I never could see in myself. I was just a little kid from the west side of Murray. Grew up in a trailer court. My mom and dad, just hardworking blue collar people. And I grew a little bit. And Dee Jensen was my high school coach. And I remember Dee asking me after my senior year what I was going to do after high school. I said, get a job. I thought that was the right answer. And he said, you're not going to go to college and play. And I said, Coach, I said, my parents could never afford, to send me to college. There's no way I could do it. And I'm the first and only college graduate in my family. It just, nobody went to college. They just got a job and worked. And so Dee said, you know what? He says, I can get somebody to pay for your college. And I thought, wow, that's how naive I was about the whole thing. And lo and behold, the next thing you know, I was packing up a car with a buddy from Olympus, and we were driving to St. George to come down here. And I played. Now, fast forward, I finished school. Let me back up. I didn't decide where to play basketball without consulting with coach. My dad never played sports. My dad was born with an eye defect and was blind in one eye. So my dad never got to play sports. In fact, I grew up playing catch with my mom. But I'd go to his house and say, Coach, what do you think I should do? Where should I go play? Well, because I was getting recruited after my 2 years at Dixie, and he would never tell me. He made me decide. And then after I made a decision, he'd tell me, yeah, you made the right choice. But he always let me go down that road. And then when I start teaching and coaching at Murray, and he sits me down one day after my first year and he goes, hey, when are you going to start working on your master's degree? And I said, I'm not going back to school. I'd had enough of that. And he sat me down, and the next thing you know, Dee and I, my coach, were at the University of Utah taking this Miller's analogy test, which was a prerequisite to get into grad school. And he went back to grad school. We went together. And I'll never be able to thank him for his kindness, his generosity. And I, to this day, will never understand why he took this little kid that was just a regular kid. I was blessed that I could shoot. I guess maybe that was why he liked me, because I could shoot. And we just had some great times. Now, fast forward to, Ray Alverson, who was on the board at the UHSAA, and he's actually in the Hall of Fame too. By the way, Dee's in the Hall of Fame too. But Ray took me under his wing and hired me as the head basketball coach. And and then when I became principal, the first letter I wrote a letter to Ray, and I thanked him. I thanked him for the way he treated me and the things I learned from him, because I found myself being a principal doing the very same things that Ray did to me. So if you were to ask me who my two real mentors were in my whole life, it would have been Dee Jensen and Ray Alverson, were the two guys that really paved the way for me to become what I've, become today.
So that's a great story with both of us. Let's back up a little bit and talk about your recruitment out of high school. So they recruited you to play for Dixie because
Well, I got recruited by some, I was 6'3" and 165 pounds. And I guess I thought I was pretty good. But I don't know that I was, for the old people out there like me and you, I'm the same age as Fred Roberts and Devin Durant. So I
yeah,
definitely wasn't the best player in the state. Uh,
yeah,
but we hung with those guys, and um, I got recruited. I think the first letter I got was from Gonzaga. I didn't even know where it was. I had to pull out a map and find out where that school was, and Weber State, and some things like that. But there wasn't really much. And then I didn't decide to go to Dixie till I think it was almost in the summer. I just didn't know how I was going to get down here and all that stuff. And quite honestly, Neil Roberts was the coach, and it was, playing wise, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I played in, I don't know, 60 games in 2 years, started most of the time. We went to the national tournament my first year in Hutchinson, Kansas. We took third in the nation, made some great friends, had a great experience. And then once we were successful like that, then it was interesting, because then I had a lot of choices coming out of Dixie College. And I remember saying to my dad, I said, where do you think I ought to play? And he said to me, Craig, he said, I don't know anything about it. He said, but it would be nice if your mother and I got to see you play. My dad only got to see me play twice in college when I was in St. George. He saw me once in Price, and I think once at Orem when we played the old Utah Tech.
yeah.
So with that, and then when I had a chance to go play at Utah, and that I knew I remember going on my recruiting trip, and Tom Chambers and Danny Vrains and Carl Bankowski and Pace Mannion, and
Sure.
we played a little. We played back then. It wasn't illegal, I guess. We put the shoes on and went and played some pickup games, and I went, "Wow, these guys are good." And my goal at that time, I wanted to get to the NCAA tournament. I thought, this is my ticket, and I signed with the U. And Jerry Pym was the coach, and he was just a good man. Took good care of me, and I ended up going there and playing for those next 2 years, and got a degree and became the first college graduate in my family.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. What's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from
it? If you ask me my biggest failure or disappointment in my life, people are going to laugh about this, but my first year at the U, we got ranked as high as fourth or fifth in the country. And we got a number 2 seed, and I think we were number 2 seed. But anyway, we got to bye the first round. Anyway, long story short, before we could even blink an eye, we went down to El Paso, won a game, and then we were in the Sweet 16 at home. And we lost to North Carolina, on our home court in the Sweet 16.
I was there.
And, it's interesting, as a side note, my younger son was playing collegiate golf, and we were over by Santa Barbara, and Coach Pym was living in Santa Barbara, and I texted him. He came over and walked 20 holes with us, watching him play. And he said to me, he said, Ham, he said, after all the years, 40 years I coached, he said, I've never had anything that I couldn't get over worse than that loss to Carolina. And it was, and he took the blame for it. I said, no, coach. I said, we just laid an egg that night. But as far as being a disappointment, as a young guy, that just crushed me, because I had no idea. Looking back on it now, it's a bigger deal to me now than it was back then, because I don't know, Sweet 16 meant a lot then, but when you look at it today, that was huge, and at the same time, Ainge was making a layup against Notre Dame, to get from the 16 to the 8, and it was just a great year for college hoop in the state of Utah. And that might be a little selfish, but that might have been one of the hardest things that I can still remember coming out of the locker room and walking up through the stands and people looking at me, and I couldn't even look at people. I never had a loss it was so difficult, but it taught me that, you can do hard things. You can overcome those kind of hard things. I don't have any regrets about my career choices. my career choice, I really was going to go to law school, but I got a phone call and asked me if I'd come and help coach. I never thought about coaching. And that's what I sort of got my feet wet with that. But that's probably one of the most disappointing things. Well, it is, you know. In fact, if you could, I don't know, you might be able to see behind me, but on my shelf up there, there's a basketball from that year. And we didn't get that basketball. I got that about 5 years ago. One of our contractors down here, who was a big booster at the time, Bud Mahas.
Uh-huh.
The superintendent walked in and said, he said, "Hey, Bud thought you might want this." Bud retired. He was 90. Bud has since passed. He had that ball in his office. And we all signed these balls. It has a block U on it. When you look at it, if I turn and look at it, it says, we beat Northeastern 94-69. And on the other side, it has the North Carolina score. And I sort of point that one to the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Something. So let me put a better take on that. I remember, because in those days, it was during that time when we always went to the NCAA tournament, me and my family and my wife. You'll appreciate this. So, and I can't remember which day it was. So it must have been the Thursday. BYU's playing. It's before you guys played. And back then, people had these TVs about this big, and there was some of them, maybe 10 or 20 throughout the arena. And so they're watching the BYU game. And at the exact same moment that BYU goes down and makes this layup, it was, I think, Illinois, if memory serves me right, Lou Henson, the coach of Illinois. And Ainge comes down and makes this layup, and everybody in the arena starts cheering because it's between games. And he walks out of the arena with his Illinois team, and everybody starts cheering. He starts waving to everybody because he thought they were all cheering for him. That was crazy. So let's go back. So it's the late 80s. You're at Murray High, and you get the call from, I don't know who at Dixon. They said, "Come coach here," or come be the assistant. You coached before you were the assistant principal at Dixie.
At Dixie. Well, I got a phone call. It's sort of funny that it was my mother-in-law. It was my wife's mother, and she was the principal's secretary at Dixie High.
Right.
And she called to tell me that the Dixie College job and the Dixie High job just came open today. But they hired Dave Rose, the former BYU coach.
Mm-hmm.
Dave got the job at Dixie College. He was coaching in Fillmore at Millard High School. The AD, David played 1 year for the AD, Doug Allred. And then when he came back from his mission, we were sophomores together. So I've known Dave since we were 18 years old. And so Dave got that job, and I thought, well, I'll just throw my name in the hat and see. And I never really thought about leaving my alma mater. I didn't, and so I grabbed my oldest son, who was at 6 at the time. We came down to grandma's house, and I had this interview, and they hired me. I was a little bit surprised because I really didn't expect to get the job back then. I just didn't know. And there was probably a side of me that I didn't want it because I had such a good situation at Murray. I had a good team coming back. I had some good kids. I had a great teaching schedule. I was at my alma mater. I liked Salt Lake. It just was a good thing. And we just decided that it'd be a great place to raise a family. And her dad had a farm down here, and the kids got to grow up riding a horse and some things we couldn't do in the city. And looking back on it now, it was the right decision. It was a great decision by the family, with my wife and I. And so I coached for those 2 years. And at the end of that second year, they had opened a new school, and I took our assistant principal and moved him to a middle school. And I started getting hit up about being an assistant principal. And I had gone back at the U while I was still up there. I was driving to the U a couple nights a week and got my master's degree, and I got an MED in curriculum and instruction. And so I had my MED, and then we were a bunch of us when I came down to St. George. Utah State had an admin program that they were running through SUU in Cedar, and so a bunch of us would drive up one day a week up to Cedar, and we were going to those classes because back then you were getting the master's plus 45 and getting that lane change. Right. I had no desire to get into administration. Like, it wasn't my goal. It wasn't on my radar. And then they came up to me out of nowhere and just said, "Hey, I think you ought to do this." And I went, whoa, 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 whoa. Because I was just, I was coaching, And and looking back on it now, the principal came and talked to me and offered it to me, and I couldn't say no. And I will say that that was a hard year, that first year as an assistant, because I was at my school and same school, and stepping away from coaching was hard. I had a connection with kids. I felt like I let them down because I left. It was tough being there. Remember, the principal came to me and said, we were talking about who we were going to hire, and I said, I can't be involved in it. I just said, you're going to have to do this one on your own, because nobody's going to be good enough. I'm too critical. You're just too critical trying to hire your replacement. Ended up hiring Ken Robinson, great guy, did a great job, had a great career coaching at Dixie High. And then the beginning of the next year, principal said to me he was going to retire. And I went, whoa. And so I'd been VP for 2 years, and I didn't want to be somebody's assistant forever. So I just threw my name in the hat, interviewed with the board, and they hired me. So,
and then you had your mother-in-law working alongside you every day.
Yeah, that was interesting things. Different last names. She ended up being my secretary, which is just bizarre. But, I'm better friends with my mother-in-law than my wife is with her own mother. Just the ultimate professional, took good care of me. And it was never an issue because most people didn't know she was my mother-in-law because we, the different last names.
Right.
But it was an interesting experience going into that principal's job. But I had a great time. The kids were amazing. We only had 900, 1,000 students. It wasn't a big school at the time. I knew everybody. They knew me. And then after I was my 13th year, and they created my job now at the district because we got so big as we've grown down here. And I didn't really want to leave, but I'd been the principal for 13 years, and I felt like the school needed a change. I needed a change, but I felt like the school, sometimes a change is good for a school.
Right.
And I felt like we had done some great things there. And I ended up coming to the district office. And now, as my responsibilities here is, I'm over all the ADs and the athletics, but I'm also over the 6 big high schools. I buy all the property. I'm over all the new construction, building buildings. So I'm doing a myriad of things like that. And it's been a great experience. I'm just finishing, in case anybody wonders, I'm just finishing my 39th year, which I just can't even believe the numbers coming out of my mouth. Never thought I would do it. And I don't know, it's been, looking back on it, I can't believe how fast it's gone by. But like I said, to start with, I can't even begin to think what my life would have been like without doing what I've been doing.
So let's talk for a moment about athletic administration. You've never really been the AD, but you've been obviously assistant principal. Ken Robinson was an AD there at Dixie for years, of course, the Big Bears there now. But think about your time since you became an administrator and all the ADs you worked with, and how their job is different today than what it was all those years ago.
When I was the assistant principal that first year, I was the AD. I mean, we didn't have an AD, and we didn't even have a formal AD, and my title wasn't AD. It was just one of my responsibilities. We just did it. Yeah. When I became principal sometime, and I'm trying to remember when that was, right after I became principal, we got Ken was an AD for like 2 periods or a period or something like that. And it was okay, but it was just a lot of work for having a 45-minute prep period that you were, paid for your prep. And then later on, the district decided we were big enough then. Snow Canyon High had opened the year I became principal. So we had 3 high schools right here in St. George. And I think it was Jim Johnson, who was the former principal at Snow Canyon, who became our assistant superintendent. He pushed the issue that we needed to have, we needed more than a period or 2 for an AD. So down here, what we've done now is our ADs are assistant principals. They're full-time. They're supposed to be half-time VPs and half-time ADs, but they're probably 90% ADs and 10% VPs, because we have another assistant principal and a principal. But then again, the other thing is, for those people wondering, our board caps the size of our high schools down here at 1,500. I think our biggest high school next year is Dixie, and they're like 1,300. So it actually works out pretty good. We have a principal, a VP, and then we have that VP AD. So, but as far as the job, it's like night and day. It's the amount of stuff that an AD's got to deal with. You know, we had, I mean, even like they just take concussions. I mean, we didn't lightning. I mean, things like that we didn't even talk about years ago. That wasn't even in our repertoire. I don't
Yeah.
remember all the years that I was an assistant principal or even as a principal. We never canceled a game because of lightning. We didn't keep a kid out because of a concussion. If the doctor said he could play, he played, you know. I mean, that
Yeah.
was the old school thing. But the responsibilities, the coach's certification, the first aid, the CPR, the athletic eligibility is so much more than it ever was back then when I first started. But for the good too. I mean,
Sure.
it's been a nice step forward, and I think we continue to improve and do those things. And those ADs now are an integral part. I mean, we didn't have trainers when we started. Now we have a great deal down here with IHC, and we have a certified trainer at every one of our high schools. So it works out well.
So let's talk for a moment about your journey with the UIAAA. You've been to obviously many of our conferences, and I know we've won our share of golf tournaments at the conference. You've been to at least 2 or 3 NIAAA conferences. Obviously, you've been on the executive committee for over 20 years. And I know you've been able to go to the Federation conference every summer. So talk about some of those experiences and what a difference it's made.
It's made, you know, from what the UIAAA was back when I was first starting to what it is today, like you said, is night and day, thanks to, you know, your great leadership. And all those that have come after you, you know, like Rich Barton now, and these guys that have worked so hard to try to make this a great organization. I've been to the NIAAA conference several times. And like I said, I go to the NFHS conference. And it's the relationships, it's the problem solving, it's rubbing shoulders with colleagues. And I remember one of my first conferences, I was just shocked as I sat in one of those roundtables with board members, and they were struggling with the very same things we were struggling with. And it's interesting that here we are, you know, 20 something years later, and we're still struggling with the transfer rule. You know, we talked about that 20 years ago, and everybody was struggling with it, and people were changing it and trying to figure out how to best do it, and how do you handle it. And we still have a hard time with that transfer rule. Just, you know, because people want to move around, and you know, I don't know if this is a good comparison, but you know, it's like I'm just reading yesterday about all these kids going into that transfer portal, you know, and I really have issues with that. These kids can just walk away from these universities, because I would have never walked away. You know, I made a commitment when I went there, and they made a commitment to me, and by dang, you just didn't walk away like that. And I guess, you know, you can, you know, do what you want. That's just my 2 cents worth. But I think that there's been such great improvements across the board. But it has become a lot more difficult. I mean, it's been a lot more complicated. It's been a lot more difficult. The different things that have come through. I know that the changes in the Title IX with the sexual harassment this year, the investigations we've been into, trying to do our best to accommodate the transgender issue. Because, you know, I want to say this, Mark, that, you know, being on that board, that we've got people on there that we want kids to play.
Right.
Our job is not to stop kids from playing. Our job is, we want kids to play because we know the benefit, and we've seen the benefit. And I personally have reaped the benefit of being involved with high school activities. And I think a lot of people think that we try to put up roadblocks. And I tell people all the time, you know, if the UHSAA is guilty of anything, we're guilty of trying to make it fair. And
Right.
we can debate for hours about what's fair and what's not fair. And everybody's got their own opinion, but I have grown to respect, and I have so many close friends and still on that committee, and people that I've rubbed shoulders with, sat in those gut-wrenching hearings that you sat in, trying to figure out, can we let this kid play? How do we let this kid play? Do we not let this kid play? I mean, it's just a myriad of those decisions. But I think for the, this, that for the, hundreds of hearings we have, we probably only deny half a dozen, or dozen.
Yeah.
So I think it's an amazing association. The connection over the years where ADs didn't have a place on the committee. We jumped that over and got an AD rep on the committee. We've got a, we've got a state board member, representative. The superintendent's supposed to be on her Sid appoint somebody to be on that committee. We've got a diversity representative now. I mean, I tell people all the time, if you really think the UHSAA is a bad place, just come down to a meeting. It's open to the public. You can come to any meeting you want. We sit there you've been there. We start at 9, we get done at 2. I mean, it's a long day and we cover a lot of stuff. But the bottom line is we're trying to do what is best for kids. And I think the UHSAA has done an amazing job.
Well, reflect on, since you've been the chair of the executive committee for all these years, maybe you did mention a couple of them earlier, but anything else you'd want to mention about the successes of the UHSAA since you've been the chair of that committee?
Well, I think that, we haven't had to do, any major overhauls, but we've added several activities. We've added girls golf, we've added lacrosse, boys and girls. We just added girls wrestling. We just added boys volleyball. I mean, we've expanded the thing to try to accommodate as many kids from as many areas as we can. We've taken realignment from 4 years down to 2 years, which has been, me personally, I think that's been one of the best things that happened.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of work for some people. It's a lot of work for that board of trustees. It's a lot of work for the staff. But I think, so why do you do it every 2 years instead of 4? It goes back to what I said. We're trying to make it fair for everybody. I don't know that we'll ever get realignment perfect. There's always the biggest school and there's always the smallest school. We hear that all the time. It's true. It really is. But it has been, for people that don't know this, I mean, if you're on the executive committee, there's no payment. We all serve. My district's kind enough to let me serve on that board and have some input about what goes on. And it's like all those principals and ADs that serve on that committee, all 25 people there, they do it because they love kids. And so I think looking back at my whole association with the UHSAA, it still, to me, the greatest thing, and this is me personally, that I get to do is there's nothing harder than giving out that second place trophy. And there's nothing funner than giving out that championship trophy.
Exactly.
I think that's selfish on one side to say, and I've been lucky enough to give a state championship trophy to each of my boys. And those are highlights of my whole life. And, I didn't plan it that way. It just sort of happened. But like I said, you see the look in those kids' face and how hard they work and what it means to them. And the doors it opens for them and the self-confidence it brings to those kids. It's just amazing. And, even when you give that second place trophy and the tears are running down their cheeks and you're trying to come up with some words to say to those kids and you tell them to keep your head up, there's 30 or 40 other teams that would just love to have a chance to play
Absolutely.
Where you are, but hopefully we're making an impact on kids. We're helping kids because like we've always said, Mark, it's easy to be a winner, but it's how you handle that adversity. And I think that hopefully these life lessons that these kids are learning, that's the thing, that's the big benefit.
Oh, no question. I wanted to ask you to share some of your experiences and successes. I want to get this right because I won't call you the assistant superintendent, but the
executive director
of secondary schools in the Washington School District. And that you've been that for close to 15 years. Two areas that I would like you to comment on more, and if you want to, is obviously you were responsible for all the turf that went in there. And of course, you took that turf class from us at the UIAAA conference. And then I want you to talk about opening up a very, very small high school at Water Canyon, right there on the border. And
Okay.
And I know we've talked about it, but boy,
I'd
share
love
some
to
of
talk.
those stories.
You know me, Mark. I'd love to talk about that one. Um, Real quick about the turf. The turf was an interesting deal because when I was principal at Dixie High School, we didn't have a football field, believe it or not. And I'm not talking, I mean, my boys think I was principal back in the days of Hoosiers or something, you know. but we played all of our games over at Dixie College, and we had this old dirt practice field. And so the board finally decided to, you know, Pineview had their own football field and Snow Canyon had their own football field. So they decided, you know what, maybe Dixie needs a football field. And we could not, with the soil we had, we couldn't sustain any grass.
Mhm.
And we fought it and fought it and fought it. And the boosters came to me one day and name's Danny Parker, said, Craig, I think we ought to get turf. And I just laughed. I said, how in the heck are we? Because nobody had turf. I think South Summit High was the first school in Utah that
They
had
were.
turf. And I think they were the only one that had turf. And so we went to the school board and we got a guy from Utah State to come down and look at the soil, and on we went. And we just didn't have, we just couldn't figure out how to make it work. So they gave us a little bit of seed money. The parents raised the money and we got that first turf field. And turf has changed quite a bit. I went to that turf seminar, which was unbelievable. One of the best things I've been to in San Antonio. Went to a high school there. I was looking at different kinds of turf, how we did it, what we did. And, you know, I'm just finishing, Hurricane High's getting new turf this summer, and it'll be the second time we've replaced turf already.
Mhm.
So the turf thing has been a great thing down here. And I'm going to knock on wood, Mark, when I say this, but we've never had a heat related injury down here. Our coaches are just amazing down here. They know it's hot. It's August. It's hot. They practice early in the morning, late at night with the turf. They've been amazing. I can't praise these guys enough for how well they handle that stuff because that turf gets hot. Now, fast forward to 2014, and I get a visit from a gentleman from out to Hilldale, and he wants to know, there's a charter school on the Arizona side, Colorado City, called El Capitan, and he wants to know how we can get El Capitan into the UHSAA. And I said, ain't happening. I said,
in Arizona.
we don't have schools from across, you're in a different state. Even if it's 20 feet, it ain't going to happen. And I said, it's just not going to happen. And he said, well, because he was a little bit ticked because his kids were playing basketball and it was a 6-hour drive down to Prescott, Arizona to the state tournament from Hilldale. And long story short, we had a school in Hilldale. Hilldale's the Utah side, Colorado City's the Arizona side. We had a school that we closed in 2000 because Warren Jeffs told the people that the world was going to end or whatever he told them, and they quit coming to school. We had an empty school, so we just closed it. And they bought it, and this guy had it. I ended up buying it back from him in 2014. We opened it up that fall. A year later, we bought a warehouse next to it, converted it into a high school. We had one graduate. And then this year, so fast forward now from 14 to 22, we just finished a football field, a track. They've played baseball on there for the first time ever. We had 29 kids, Mark, that came to baseball tryouts, and only 2 had gloves. We've got a girls softball team. I know that 4 games into the season, they had been outscored 75-1, and they were elated to even have a chance to play. It's hard to believe that in this day and age, and we're, 22 miles from Hurricane, 40 miles from St. George, we had a community that was just, I don't know how to best describe it, was
straight out of the 1890s.
Yeah, just lost. I went to that first volleyball practice. Girls didn't even know what volleyball was. They didn't know if it was okay to wear volleyball uniforms. Went to basketball practice. It's one of the greatest success stories that I've ever, in my 39 years, I've never been involved in anything that I've seen make a bigger change than what's happened out there in Hilldale. We were averaging somewhere between 25 and 35 graduates a year. It's starting to grow a little bit. There's a total of about 550 kids between the elementary and the high school. High school is 7 through 12. We're going to play 8-man football next year, believe it or not, in Hilldale, Utah. Had a guy out there. There's a little airport out there, and he sent me a picture. He flew over the field, sent me the picture and a thank you card telling us just thank you from the bottom of my heart. He said, never in my lifetime did I ever think I'd see Friday Night Lights in Hilldale, Utah. So we're putting together, as people may know, I probably haven't heard a lot about it. We're putting together a statewide 8-man football league. We've never had that in Utah, but it's perfect. We've got kids, they've never put a helmet on. They have no idea what they're getting into. But I'm sure it'll be great. We built a football stadium out there. They've got their own track team, cross country team.
If you build it, they will come.
That's right. So I will be there next August. I'll invite everybody down from the committee and the staff and say, you need to come to the first football game at Water Canyon High School on the first Friday night. So
that's awesome. Let's finish up with a couple, 2 or 3 questions. What's the favorite part of your job now that maybe would be different than the favorite part of your job when you were a principal and different from the favorite part when you were coaching?
Well, the favorite part of your job when you're a coach, as you well know, is that relationship you have with kids. When you get out of coaching, it's difficult. You lose that. You just don't get that same kind of relationship. I mean, here I am, 62 years old, and I still get phone calls from kids I coached back in Murray in the early 80s that are now 50 years old, talking about the old days. And like I know, those are the things you can. And as a principal, one of the things that was great was, Dixie got to 1,200 kids or something when I was there. But at graduation, I pretty much knew every kid that walked across that stage.
Right.
And those were the big, that was sort of the reward that I got personally, was to see those kids and the successes. But still, I think the real payback for being in education is when they come back. You'll see them at a store and they'll say, hey, some will call me coach, and I'll say, you must be old if you're calling me coach. That was a long time ago. Or they'll say, hey, Mr. Hammer, and they'll say, do you remember me? And I'll look at them and I'll say, I ought to know you, huh? And they said, yeah. And they'll tell me who they are and give me a big hug and introduce me to their wife and their kids. And, you see that. And I think that that's the real highlight, is that they're not better people because of Craig Hammer necessarily, but they came through a system that cared about kids, that gave them some opportunities, and they made the best of it, And so I think that's really the highlight. You miss that now that I'm at the district office. I've been here, you miss that. I don't know the kids like I used to know the kids.
Sure.
Still know, still a smaller community, and there's a lot of people I do know, and I think now, I can sit back and smile. I've been involved, Mark, I can't even count the number of schools we built since that I've been in my position. And you see the change it's brought in the community and the opportunity that gives more kids to play and those kind of things. It's pretty rewarding. And then on the downside is I sort of like St. George better when it was a little bit smaller. And for all you guys and for everybody listening to this, just one weekend, stay home so we can go golfing.
Yeah. What did I hear?
Get on a golf course down here. We can't get in a restaurant.
I was golfing with Dan Cowan the other day, and we were talking about they're calling Kanab the new St. George because St. George is just so big now. I remember they built that road to the airport, the new airport, and of course, it's way out there. And of course, now you go down River Road and it's got houses all the way out to the airport, and there's no sign of slowing down.
It's not quite when I came here in 1978, there were 2 street lights in the whole town on St. George Boulevard, one to turn left to go down to Dixie College and one on Main Street. And that was it. Yeah. And now you can't even count, but all in all, it's been a very rewarding career, Mark. I appreciate your friendship, our relationship we've had, and how we can reminisce over all these years. I'm grateful to all the good people at the UHSAA who care about kids, those people in the trenches that are coaching, the ADs. They're good people doing the very best job they can do.
Let me finish with these 2 questions. The first being, if you had 2 suggestions for a brand new AD that they would need to follow these 2 suggestions in order to be successful, what would those 2 suggestions be?
I think if I was a brand new AD, it's all about relationships. and you need to develop a relationship with your coaches. You got to have that relationship where they know they can depend on you, they can trust you, and that you'll follow through with whatever you say you're going to do. I mean, to me, that's probably the most critical thing. And then along those same lines is, pride yourself in never letting anything leave your desk and go back into the principal's office where he has to solve it. Pride yourself in solving your own problems. Take care of that stuff, because I promise you, and I've said this to our school board several times. I've told them, I said, the hardest job in the school district is not the superintendent, and it's definitely not me. I said, the hardest job in this school district is a high school principal, because you get it from so many different angles, so many different activities, so much time. You can be an elementary principal, you do a few nights, pretty much with a middle school, the same thing. But if you're a high school principal, and I can say it as an AD, as an assistant at a high school, if you're an administrator at a high school, it's not a job, it's a way of life. You eat it, you drink it, and you sleep it. And it's a 24/7. And if it's not, you're probably not doing it justice. My kids, if I look back at my kids and you ask them about growing up, my girls will talk to you about, Dad would always take us to state drill and state volleyball. And my boys are going, oh, we'd go to state hoop every year. We'd go to state football at the U. And that's just how they grew up. That was part of our life. And I have no regrets. I have none of that stuff. I just think that those are a couple of tips that if I was a first year AD, you know what, it's all about relationships, and I think that's probably the best piece of advice I could give them.
All right, well, let's finish with this question that I plagiarized from Dan Rather. Craig, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
The only thing you should have asked me probably was, well, that's a tough one, Mark, because I'm just thinking, I thought I had one, but I think we've touched every base. I think that back to what I just said about ADs, it's been a great career for me. Next year may be my last year, and I can't believe how time has flown by. And the relationships you develop with people aren't just temporary; they're just lifetime. I mean, I know that long after I leave, and I think you and I'll still hit the links. We'll still be
Absolutely.
great friends. We'll be lifelong friends. And I think it's nice to be able to walk away. And I think for most of us, we don't pat ourselves on the back. We don't want any accolades. I just want to walk away with my head held high, knowing that maybe we made a difference. We made a difference in the life of a kid. And if I can say that and think that we helped somebody like that we were a service, we provided that service, I think that we can walk away with our heads held pretty high, because I think that's what life's all about, is providing that service and try to help somebody and make their life a little bit better.
Very well said. That thought wraps up another edition of the UIAAA Connection. Once again, our guest today has been Craig Hammer, the chair of the UHSAA Executive Committee. Thanks so much, Craig, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.